Step into History Page, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings timeless mysteries to life.
In the sleepy village of St. Agnes Grange, a single knitting needle pierces the heart of Mrs. Eleanor McGinty, a woman who saw too much and said too little, who wielded her own needle against her in a chilling act of betrayal. Was it the doctor with blood on his gloves, the spinster hiding a scandalous affair, or the gardener caught in a web of lies? As secrets unravel like threads from a shawl, Hercule Poirot's little gray cells weave through a tapestry of deception. Red wool, a clumsy stitch, a Turkish cigarette, and a diary brimming with the village's darkest truths. Will you unravel the mystery before the killer strikes again? Dive into this Agatha Christie-style tale of suspense where every clue counts and the truth is as sharp as a needle. Chapter 1. The Quiet of St. Agnes Grange. The village of St. Agnes Grange, nestled in the folds of the Devonshire countryside, was a place where time seemed to have paused, as if reluctant to disturb the ivy-clad cottages and the ancient oaks that stood sentinel over the green. It was the sort of place where one might expect nothing more dramatic than a squabble over the church fate's best marrow or a heated debate about the vicar's sermon. Yet beneath its serene exterior, St. Agnes Grange harbored secrets as old and tangled as the roots beneath its soil. On a crisp October morning in 1952, the sun cast a golden sheen over the Grange, its rays glinting off the mullioned windows of Thornfield Hall, the grandest house in the village. The hall, a sprawling Jacobean manor, was home to the widowed Mrs. Eleanor McGinty, a woman of 62 whose reputation for fastidiousness was rivaled only by her skill with a pair of knitting needles. Her nimble fingers produced intricate shawls and scarves that were the envy of the Women's Institute, though her sharp tongue and sharper judgments often left her neighbors wary. Mrs. McGinty's life was one of routine. Each morning she would sit in her favorite armchair by the drawing-room window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she surveyed the village through lace curtains. She was known to observe everything: the postman's tardiness, the vicar's furtive glances at the publican's wife, the hurried footsteps of young lovers stealing moments in the churchyard. People, she would say, her lips pursed, are never so clever as they think they are. This particular morning, however, the rhythm of her needles had stilled. The drawing-room was silent, save for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Mrs. McGinty sat slumped in her armchair, her eyes wide and unseeing, a single knitting needle protruding grotesquely from her chest. Blood had seeped into the delicate lace of her shawl, staining the intricate pattern she had been working on, a pattern, it would later be noted, that was unfinished. The discovery was made by Mrs. Clara Henshaw, the housekeeper, who had arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, as was her custom. Her scream shattered the morning's peace, bringing the gardener, young Tom Willard, running from the rose beds. Together they stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the tableau of death before them. The police were summoned, and soon the quiet village was abuzz with whispers and speculation. By noon, the local constabulary, led by the earnest but unimaginative Inspector Grayson, had cordoned off the drawing-room. The inspector, a man of broad shoulders and limited patience, surveyed the scene with a frown. "A clear case of murder," he declared, adjusting his hat. "Stabbed with her own knitting needle. Whoever did this had a personal grudge, mark my words." The villagers, gathered in knots outside the hall, agreed. Mrs. McGinty had not been a woman to inspire affection. Her penchant for uncovering secrets, whether it was Mr. Langley's gambling debts or Miss Vernon's clandestine romance with a married man, had made her many enemies. Yet who among them would go so far as to kill? The cast of Thornfield Hall's regular visitors was as varied as it was suspect. There was Dr. Harold Bentley, the village physician who had been seen leaving the hall late the previous evening, his face pale and his manner agitated. Miss Amelia Vernon, a spinster of 40, had been Mrs. McGinty's closest confidant, though their friendship was rumored to have soured in recent weeks. Mr. Charles Langley, a retired solicitor with a penchant for whiskey, had been heard arguing with Mrs. McGinty over money only days before. Then there was young Tom Willard, the gardener, whose devotion to Mrs. McGinty seemed at odds with his sullen demeanor. And finally there was Mrs. Henshaw herself, whose loyalty to her employer was tempered by a quiet resentment, for Mrs. McGinty had never been generous with wages. As the police began their inquiries, a sense of unease settled over St. Agnes Grange. The villagers, accustomed to the gentle rhythms of rural life, found themselves caught in a web of suspicion. Who had slipped into Thornfield Hall under cover of darkness? Who had wielded the knitting needle with such deadly precision? And why had Mrs. McGinty, a woman who prided herself on knowing everyone's secrets, failed to foresee her own demise? It was at this moment of uncertainty that a small, impeccably dressed figure appeared on the scene. Captain Arthur Hastings, Poirot's steadfast friend and occasional chronicler, had been staying at a nearby inn, recovering from a bout of influenza. The news of Mrs. McGinty's murder reached him over a late breakfast, delivered by the innkeeper's daughter with breathless excitement. Hastings, ever the man of action, felt a familiar stirring of curiosity. This, he thought, is a case for Poirot. He dispatched a telegram to London, where Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, was enjoying a rare moment of repose. Poirot, with his egg-shaped head, meticulously waxed mustache, and unerring faith in the power of his little gray cells, had retired from active detective work, or so he claimed. Yet the lure of a perplexing mystery was more than he could resist. By evening, a sleek black Daimler was seen pulling up outside the inn, and out stepped Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the twilight. "Mon ami Hastings," Poirot greeted, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. "You have summoned me to a most intriguing affair. A knitting needle, you say? C'est magnifique. The weapon, it is always a clue to the mind of the murderer." Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's flair for the dramatic, led him to Thornfield Hall, where Inspector Grayson was still grappling with the case. The inspector, though initially skeptical of Poirot's involvement, could not deny the detective's reputation. "Very well, Mr. Poirot," he said gruffly. "But I warn you, this is a straightforward case. We'll have the culprit in custody by tomorrow." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Straightforward, Inspector?" "No, no. The truth, it is never so simple. It hides like a needle in a haystack, waiting for Hercule Poirot to uncover it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the hall, Poirot began his inspection. He moved with the precision of a watchmaker, noting the angle of the knitting needle, the position of the armchair, the faint smudge of mud on the carpet near the window. His eyes lingered on the unfinished shawl, its pattern interrupted by the stain of blood. "This," he murmured, "is no ordinary crime. It is a crime of passion, yes, but also of calculation." Hastings watched, marveling at the way Poirot's mind seemed to dissect the scene. To the untrained eye, the room was a picture of domestic tranquility, save for the grim presence of death. But to Poirot, it was a canvas of clues, each one a brushstroke in the portrait of a murderer. As the chapter drew to a close, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression grave. "We are at the beginning, mon ami, but already I sense the threads of this mystery. They are knotted, tangled, but they will lead us to the truth. Tomorrow we begin the interviews, every word, every glance, every hesitation. It will speak to Hercule Poirot." And so, in the quiet of St. Agnes Grange, beneath the polite veneer of village life, a deadly game had begun. The players were assembled, the stage was set, and Hercule Poirot, with his unmatched intellect, was ready to unravel the secrets of Mrs. McGinty's death. Chapter 2. The Crime Unfolds. The morning after Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder dawned gray and heavy, with a mist curling through the lanes of St. Agnes Grange like the tendrils of some spectral hand. Thornfield Hall, its stone facade damp with dew, stood silent, its windows reflecting the somber mood of the village. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and the faint metallic tang of blood that lingered in the drawing room. Hercule Poirot, ever punctual, arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, his black patent leather shoes clicking on the flagstone path as he approached the hall, with Captain Hastings trailing behind, his notebook at the ready. Inspector Grayson greeted them at the door, his face etched with the strain of a sleepless night. "We've made some progress, Mr. Poirot," he said, ushering them inside. "The coroner's preliminary report confirms it. Mrs. McGinty was killed between 10 and midnight last night. The knitting needle pierced her heart directly, a single deliberate thrust. No signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds. She didn't see it coming, or didn't expect it from her attacker." Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign Hastings recognized as the detective's mind engaging with a new piece of the puzzle. "No struggle, you say? That is most interesting, Inspector. It suggests familiarity, intimacy even. The victim she trusted her killer, or at least she did not fear them until the fatal moment." They proceeded to the drawing room, where the scene remained untouched, preserved for Poirot's scrutiny. Mrs. McGinty's body had been removed, but the armchair, stained with blood, stood as a grim centerpiece. The knitting needle, now in police custody, had been replaced with a chalk outline on the floor marking its position. Poirot's eyes roamed the room, taking in every detail. The half-finished shawl draped over the armrest, its intricate pattern of cables and lace loops, the teacup on the side table, its contents cold and untouched, the window slightly ajar with a faint smudge of mud on the sill. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, gesturing toward the window. "Observe the mud. It is not from the garden outside, no. The soil there is dark and rich, but this is lighter, almost clay-like. It comes from elsewhere, perhaps the path by the river. We must ascertain who walked that path last night." Hastings jotted this down, marveling at Poirot's ability to notice what others overlooked. "Do you think the killer entered through the window?" he asked. Poirot shook his head. "No, Hastings. The window, it is too small for an adult to climb through comfortably, and the latch is stiff. No, the killer entered through the door as a guest or a familiar. The window, it was open to mislead or perhaps to ventilate the room after the deed was done. Inspector Grayson, overhearing, snorted. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Mr. Poirot. I've got a good lead already. Dr. Bentley was seen leaving the hall at 10:30 last night looking agitated. He's admitted to a row with Mrs. McGinty over her will. She was planning to change it, cut him out entirely. He's got motive, means, and opportunity." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A row, you say? Most intriguing. But tell me, Inspector, what of the others who visited Mrs. McGinty yesterday? The gardener, the housekeeper, the spinster, the solicitor. Each, I am sure, has a story to tell." Grayson sighed, handing Poirot a list of alibis compiled from preliminary interviews. "They're all claiming to be elsewhere, of course. Mrs. Henshaw says she left at 6 after preparing supper. Tom Willard was in the pub until 9. Miss Vernon was at the vicarage for a Women's Institute meeting until 10. Langley claims he was home alone, reading. None of them saw anything unusual, or so they say." Poirot studied the list. His lips pursed. "Alibis, they are like the stitches in Madame McGinty's knitting, neat on the surface but easily unraveled if one pulls the right thread. We shall begin with the interviews, Inspector. I wish to see each suspect, to hear their voices, to observe their manner. The truth it hides in the smallest gestures." The first to be interviewed was Mrs. Clara Henshaw, the housekeeper, a stout woman of 50 with a face like a well-worn leather satchel. She sat stiffly in the parlor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously to the door. Poirot, seated opposite, adopted his most disarming smile. "Madam Henshaw," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "you were devoted to Mrs. McGinty, were you not? Yet devotion, it can sometimes mask resentment. Tell me, what was your relationship with your employer?" Mrs. Henshaw's cheeks flushed. "I did my duty, Mr. Poirot. Mrs. McGinty was a particular woman, but I managed. She wasn't one for praise, mind, and the wages weren't what you'd call generous, but I've been with her 10 years. Never a cross word between us." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. 10 years and never a cross word? That is remarkable, madam. Yet I understand Mrs. McGinty was not always kind in her judgments. Did she ever speak to you of her suspicions about others in the village? Mrs. Henshaw hesitated, her fingers tightening. She did like to talk, sir. Always watching, always noting things. She said once that Dr. Bentley was too fond of his laudanum and that Mr. Langley had debts he couldn't pay. She even hinted Miss Vernon was keeping secrets, something about a letter she'd seen. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "A letter, you say? Most interesting. And what did Mrs. McGinty intend to do with this knowledge?" Mrs. Henshaw's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said she'd confront them, sir. Said it was her duty to keep the village honest. I told her to let sleeping dogs lie, but she wouldn't listen." After Mrs. Henshaw was dismissed, Poirot turned to Hastings. "You see, mon ami, already the threads begin to form a pattern. Mrs. McGinty, she was a collector of secrets, and secrets, they are dangerous currency." Next came Tom Willard, the gardener, a lanky young man of 22 with a sullen air and dirt-stained hands. He slouched in his chair, avoiding Poirot's gaze. "I didn't do it," he muttered before Poirot could speak. "I was at the Red Lion till 9. Ask anyone." Poirot's smile was patient. Monsieur Willard, I do not accuse you yet. Tell me, what was your relationship with Mrs. McGinty? You worked for her, yes, but was there more? A confidence, perhaps, or a disagreement? Tom's jaw tightened. She was good to me in her way. Gave me work when no one else would. But she could be sharp. Said I was lazy, that I'd never amount to anything. Last week she caught me talking to Miss Vernon in the garden. Got proper mad, said I was wasting time. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this conversation with Miss Vernon, it was about... Tom flushed. Nothing important. Just village talk. Poirot let the silence stretch, a technique Hastings knew well. Tom shifted uncomfortably, then blurted, "All right. She was asking about Mrs. McGinty's will. Said she was worried the old lady was changing it, that's all." As Tom was escorted out, Poirot murmured, "The will again. It is like the knot at the center of this mystery, no? We must learn more." The interviews continued through the morning, each suspect revealing fragments of truth and deception. Dr. Bentley admitted to his argument with Mrs. McGinty, but insisted he left her alive. Miss Vernon spoke of her friendship with the victim, her voice trembling as she denied any rift. Mr. Langley, red-faced and blustering, claimed ignorance of any financial disputes, though his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. By noon, Poirot retired to the garden where he paced the gravel paths, his hands clasped behind his back. "Hastings," he said at last, "this case, it is like Madame McGinty's knitting, a pattern that seems simple but hides complexity. The knitting needle, the mud, the will, the letter, they are all threads. But which one, I wonder, will lead us to the killer?" As the mist thickened around Thornfield Hall, the stage was set for a deeper unraveling of St. Agnes Grange's secrets. Poirot's little gray cells were at work, and the truth, though still obscured, was beginning to take shape. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Hercule Poirot. The mist that had cloaked St. Agnes Grange in the early hours had lifted by midday, revealing a sky of pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud. Thornfield Hall, however, seemed untouched by the light, its heavy stone walls absorbing the gloom of the previous night's tragedy. Inside, the air was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the old manor held their breath, waiting for the truth to be uncovered. Hercule Poirot, having completed his initial inspection and interviews, stood in the entrance hall, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the somber chaos around him. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, watched with a mixture of admiration and impatience as Poirot adjusted his already impeccable tie. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate, "this house, it is a stage, and we are but players in a drama written by a murderer. The script, it is hidden, but Hercule Poirot will uncover it line by line." Hastings nodded, though he privately wondered if Poirot's penchant for theatrics might delay the case. "What's our next step, Poirot?" "The inspector seems convinced, Doctor. Bentley is our man." Poirot's mustache quivered with disdain. "Inspector Grayson, he sees only the surface, the argument, the timing, the obvious. But the obvious, Hastings, is rarely the truth. Non, we must dig deeper, into the hearts and minds of those who knew Madame McGinty. Come, let us walk the grounds. The air, it clears the mind." They stepped out into the garden where the roses, still in bloom despite the late season, lent a deceptive air of tranquility. Poirot's eyes scanned the paths, noting the gravel disturbed near the gate, the faint imprint of a boot in the soft earth by the river path. "You see, Hastings," he said, pointing to the print. "This is the same clay-like mud we found on the drawing-room sill. Someone walked here last night, someone who did not wish to be seen." Hastings squinted at the ground. "Could it be Tom Willard? He's the gardener, after all. He'd be out here regularly." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but a gardener does not tread so lightly nor choose a path so concealed. No, this is the step of one who moves with purpose and with caution." Their walk was interrupted by the arrival of a police constable, a young man with a flushed face and a notebook clutched tightly in his hand. "Mr. Poirot, sir," he said, saluting awkwardly. "Inspector Grayson sent me. We found something in Mrs. McGinty's desk, a letter half-written. It's addressed to Miss Vernon, but it's odd, sir." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Odd, you say? Bon. Let us see this letter at once." They returned to the house where the constable led them to Mrs. McGinty's study, a small room lined with books and cluttered with knitting patterns. On the desk lay the letter, written in Mrs. McGinty's precise, angular hand. Poirot donned a pair of white gloves, produced to Hastings' amusement from some hidden pocket, and lifted the paper with care. The letter read, "My dear Amelia, I have wrestled with my conscience, but I can no longer remain silent. What I have learned about you weighs heavily upon me. Your actions, though you may believe them justified, cannot be condoned. I intend to speak to the vicar tomorrow and thereafter to the authorities unless you can provide an explanation that satisfies me. Meet me tonight at 10 o'clock. Do not fail me. Yours in truth, Eleanor McGinty." The letter ended abruptly, the final Y trailing off as if the pen had been snatched from her hand. Poirot's brow furrowed as he read it again, his fingers tracing the words. "This," he murmured, "is the heart of the matter. Madame McGinty, she knew something dangerous. And this knowledge, it cost her her life." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, frowned. "It sounds like she was blackmailing Miss Vernon. Could that be why she was killed? To silence her?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Blackmail, Hastings? Perhaps, but Madame McGinty, she was not a woman of greed. No, her motive was moral, not mercenary. She wished to correct a wrong, to expose a secret. And this secret, it is the key." Inspector Grayson, who had joined them, scoffed. "It's clear as day, Mr. Poirot. Miss Vernon got wind of this letter, came to the hall last night, and stabbed Mrs. McGinty to keep her quiet. We'll have her in for questioning again this afternoon." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Inspector. To accuse without evidence is to knit with a broken needle. The work it will unravel. We must first understand the nature of this secret. Miss Vernon, she must be questioned, but with care. The truth, it is delicate, like the lace of Madame McGinty's shawl." The afternoon was spent arranging interviews, with Poirot insisting on speaking to Miss Amelia Vernon first. She arrived at the hall at 3 o'clock, her pale face composed, but her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her handbag. A woman of 40, she had the faded beauty of youth long past. Her auburn hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp but shadowed. She sat in the parlor facing Poirot, who regarded her with a mixture of sympathy and scrutiny. "Mademoiselle Vernon," he began, his voice gentle, "you were a friend to Madame McGinty, were you not? Yet this letter suggests a rift. Tell me, what was the nature of your disagreement? Miss Vernon's lips tightened. There was no disagreement, Mr. Poirot. Eleanor and I were close. She sometimes misunderstood things, that's all. I don't know what she meant by that letter. I never received it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, mademoiselle, you were at the vicarage until 10 last night, were you not? The very hour she requested your presence. Did you perhaps come to Thornfield Hall afterward? Miss Vernon's composure faltered, her fingers tightening on her bag. No, I went straight home after the meeting. I was tired and it was a cold night. I had no reason to come here. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. No reason, mademoiselle. Yet, Madame McGinty, she believed you had a secret so grave she felt compelled to act. What was it, I wonder, that she discovered? Miss Vernon's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. I don't know, she never spoke of it to me. Please, Mr. Poirot, I loved Eleanor, I would never have harmed her. As she was escorted out, Poirot turned to Hastings. She is frightened, mon ami. Not only of us, but of something or someone else. The secret, it is not hers alone. It binds her to another. The day drew to a close with further inquiries. Poirot examined the knitting basket beside Mrs. McGinty's armchair, noting a single strand of wool, bright red, unlike the soft cream of her shawl, caught in the wicker. He held it up to the light, his expression thoughtful. This wool, it does not belong. It is a clue, Hastings, a thread from another's hand. Inspector Grayson, growing impatient, pressed for action. We've got the letter, Mr. Poirot. We've got witnesses placing Dr. Bentley here, and now this business with Miss Vernon. Let's bring them both in and sort this out. Poirot shook his head. No, Inspector. To rush is to stumble. We have the letter, but we do not yet have the truth. Tomorrow we will speak to the others again. Dr. Bentley, Mr. Langley, young Tom. Each holds a piece of the puzzle, and Hercule Poirot will fit them together. As the sun set over St. Agnes Grange, casting long shadows across the garden, Poirot stood alone by the river path, his eyes fixed on the faint boot print in the clay. The mystery of Mrs. McGinty's death was deepening, its threads weaving a tapestry of deceit and hidden motives. For Poirot, the game was truly afoot, and the little gray cells were working tirelessly to unravel the knot at its heart. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy clouds that hung over St. Agnes Grange, casting Thornfield Hall in a muted light that seemed to mirror the village's unease. Inside the hall, the parlor had become a makeshift interrogation room, its oak-paneled walls absorbing the low murmur of voices as Hercule Poirot prepared to delve deeper into the mystery of Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder. Captain Hastings sat at a small table, his notebook open, his pen poised to capture every word, while Poirot, immaculate in his pinstriped suit, paced slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding, today we listen. The suspects, they will speak, but their words they will conceal as much as they reveal. It is in the silences, the hesitations, the glances, that Hercule Poirot will find the truth. Hastings nodded, though he privately wondered if Poirot's faith in his little gray cells might be tested by the tangle of lies they were about to encounter. Inspector Grayson, standing by the door, shifted impatiently, eager to press forward with his theory that Dr. Bentley or Miss Vernon was the culprit. Poirot, however, had insisted on re-interviewing all the suspects, methodically building a picture of the hours leading up to Mrs. McGinty's death. The first to be summoned was Dr. Harold Bentley, the village physician, a man of 50 with a weary face and eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. He entered the parlor with a stiff gait, his medical bag clutched tightly as if it were a shield. Poirot greeted him with a courteous nod, gesturing to a chair. "Dr. Bentley," Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild. "You were seen leaving Thornfield Hall at 10:30 on the night of the murder. You admitted to an argument with Madame McGinty about her will. Tell me, what was the nature of this disagreement?" Dr. Bentley's hands tightened on his bag. "It was a private matter, Mr. Poirot. Mrs. McGinty was reconsidering her beneficiaries. She felt I had been negligent in my care of her late husband, which is nonsense. I told her so and we had words, but I left her alive, I swear it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Negligent, you say? A serious accusation. And yet, Madame McGinty, she was not a woman to make such claims lightly. Did she have evidence, perhaps? A letter, a record of some kind?" Dr. Bentley's face paled. "She mentioned a diary, but I never saw it. She said it contained observations about the village. I told her to burn it. It was nothing but gossip." Poirot leaned forward, his voice like silk. "And this diary, Doctor, where is it now? Did you perhaps search for it after your argument?" "No," Dr. Bentley's voice cracked. "I left at 10:30, as I said. I went straight home. My housekeeper can confirm I was there by 11. Poirot made a small, non-committal gesture. "We shall verify, Doctor, but tell me, did you notice anything unusual as you left? A sound, a shadow, a person in the garden?" Dr. Bentley hesitated, his brow furrowing. "There was a figure near the gate. I couldn't see clearly. It was dark and the mist was thick. I thought it was Tom Willard tending the roses. He's often out late." Poirot's as system nodded, noting the information in his mental ledger. "Most interesting, Doctor. We will speak again. For now, you may go." As Dr. Bentley departed, Hastings whispered, "He's hiding something, Poirot. That business about the diary, too quick to dismiss it." "Oui, Hastings," Poirot replied, his eyes fixed on the door. "The diary, it is another thread in our tapestry. We must find it." Next came Mr. Charles Langley, the retired solicitor, whose florid complexion and trembling hands betrayed a reliance on whiskey. He sat heavily, his eyes darting between Poirot and the inspector. "Mr. Langley," Poirot said, his tone polite but probing, "you were heard arguing with Madame McGinty about money. A debt, perhaps, or something more personal?" Langley's face reddened further. "It was nothing serious. Eleanor, Mrs. McGinty, was always meddling in my affairs. She claimed I owed her money from a loan years ago. I told her it was settled, but she wouldn't let it go." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A loan, monsieur. And yet she threatened to take action. What action, I wonder?" Langley shifted uncomfortably. "She said she'd tell the bank, ruin my credit. But I didn't kill her, Mr. Poirot. I was home by 9 reading. Alone, yes, but that's the truth." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And the red wool, monsieur, found in Madame McGinty's knitting basket. It is not hers. Do you know of it?" Langley frowned, puzzled. "Red wool? I don't knit, Mr. Poirot, no idea." After Langley's departure, Poirot murmured, "He is nervous, Hastings, but not necessarily guilty. His fear, it is of exposure, not of capture." Miss Amelia Vernon returned next, her composure brittle. Poirot's questions were gentle but incisive, circling back to the letter. Mademoiselle, you claim you knew nothing of Madame McGinty's accusations, yet the letter suggests a grave secret. Did she ever speak to you of a diary, perhaps? Miss Vernon's eyes widened. A diary? No, she never mentioned it, but she was always writing things down. She liked to know things, to judge people. Poirot's voice softened. And did she judge you, mademoiselle? Did she know something you wished to keep hidden? Tears welled in her eyes. I told you I don't know what she meant. I was at the vicarage until 10, then home, I swear it. Poirot dismissed her gently, but his expression was thoughtful. She is protecting someone, Hastings. The secret, it is not hers alone. The final interview was with Tom Willard, whose sullen demeanor had hardened into defiance. I told you I was at the pub, he said, his voice low. I didn't see nothing. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet Dr. Bentley saw a figure in the garden, possibly you. Were you there, Monsieur Willard, after 9? Tom's jaw clenched. I wasn't. He's lying or mistaken. I don't know nothing about no wool or diaries. As Tom left, Poirot turned to Hastings. The boy, he is loyal. To whom, I wonder? The diary, the wool, the mud, the letter. They are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. Inspector Grayson, growing frustrated, interrupted. We're wasting time, Mr. Poirot. The letter points to Miss Vernon, and Bentley's story is shaky. Let's arrest them and be done with it. Poirot's smile was patient. No, Inspector. The truth, it is like a fine stitch. It requires precision. We must find the diary, and we must trace the red wool. Tomorrow we search the house more thoroughly, and we visit the river path. The answers, they are close. As the interviews concluded, Poirot stood by the parlor window, gazing at the darkening garden. The mystery of Mrs. McGinty's death was a knot of motives and secrets, but Poirot's mind was already weaving the threads together, inching closer to the truth hidden in the shadows of Thornfield Hall. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The air in St. Agnes Grange carried a chill as the 5th day since Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder dawned, the village still cloaked in unease. Thornfield Hall stood resolute, its windows like unblinking eyes watching the comings and goings of the police and the curious villagers who lingered at its gates. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat in the parlor, his small frame dwarfed by the high-backed chair, his eyes sharp as he reviewed his notes. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful, scribe, sat nearby, his pen scratching as he recorded Poirot's murmured observations. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice low. The case, it begins to take shape, but the shadows, they mislead. We are surrounded by red herrings, each designed to distract from the truth, the letter, the argument with Doctor. Bentley, the figure in the garden, these are but bait cast by a clever hand. Hercule Poirot, however, will not be so easily fooled. Hastings looked up, puzzled. Red herrings, Poirot? You mean Miss Vernon's letter and Doctor? Bentley's row with Mrs. McGinty aren't the key to the case. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. They are important, but they are not the whole story. The killer, they wish us to focus on the obvious, to chase the loudest clues. But the truth, it whispers, not shouts. We must listen carefully. Inspector Grayson entered, his face set in a scowl. Mr. Poirot, we've got a breakthrough. A witness, a milkman, says he saw Miss Vernon near the hall at 10:15 that night. Not at the vicarage as she claimed, and we've found a pair of gloves in Dr. Bentley's surgery with traces of blood on them. I'm ready to make arrests." Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but firm. "Patience, Inspector. A witness, you say? And gloves? These are intriguing, but they are not proof. The milkman, he saw Miss Vernon in the dark, in the mist, non? And the gloves, have they been tested? Is the blood Madame McGinty's?" Grayson's scowl deepened. "The lab's working on it, but it's enough to bring them in for questioning again. You're making this too complicated, Mr. Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Complicated? Non, Inspector, the truth, it is simple, but it is buried beneath layers of deception. Let us examine these new clues with care." The morning was spent verifying the milkman's testimony. Mr. Albert Stokes, a wiry man with a nervous tic, stood in the parlor twisting his cap in his hands. "I was delivering to the vicarage, sir," he said, addressing Poirot. "Saw a woman in a dark coat near the hall's gate around 10:15. Looked like Miss Vernon, same build, same way of walking. I didn't think much of it till I heard about the murder." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "And the light, Monsieur Stokes? It was dark, misty, oui? How well could you see?" Stokes hesitated. "Well enough, sir. The moon was out and there's a lamp by the gate. I'd swear it was her." Poirot nodded, dismissing the milkman with a polite smile. "A credible witness, perhaps, but not infallible. The coat, the walk, these are not unique. We must speak to Mademoiselle Vernon again." Miss Vernon was summoned, her face pale and drawn as she entered the parlor. Her hands trembled as she sat, and her eyes darted to the door as if expecting escape to be cut off. Poirot's tone was gentle but unyielding. "Mademoiselle," he began, "you told us you were at the vicarage until 10, then went home. Yet a witness places you near Thornfield Hall at 10:15. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Miss Vernon's lips parted, then closed. I was at the vicarage, Mr. Poirot. I left at 10, as I said, and walked straight home. Whoever the milkman saw, it wasn't me." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft. "And your coat, mademoiselle?" "A dark one, perhaps, with a high collar." Her eyes widened. "Yes, but many women have such coats. It proves nothing." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Nothing, perhaps, but it suggests much. And the letter from Madame McGinty, did she ever speak to you of a diary, one that might contain your secret?" Miss Vernon's composure cracked, her voice rising. "I've told you I know nothing of a diary. Eleanor was my friend. I had no reason to harm her." As she was escorted out, Poirot turned to Hastings. "She is frightened, mon ami, but not only of us. There is another player in this game, one who pulls her strings." The investigation shifted to Dr. Bentley's gloves found in a drawer in his surgery. The bloodstains were faint, barely visible, but damning in the eyes of Inspector Grayson. Poirot examined them with a magnifying glass, his expression thoughtful. "The blood, it is not fresh. And the gloves, they are too large for Dr. Bentley's hands. Curious, non? A man does not keep ill-fitting gloves in his surgery unless they are planted." Grayson bristled. "Planted? You're saying someone framed him?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I say only that we must question everything. The gloves, the milkman's sighting, these are designed to lead us astray. We must return to the heart of the matter, the diary, and the red wool." The search for the diary resumed with renewed vigor. Poirot, accompanied by Hastings and a constable, combed Mrs. McGinty's study, pulling books from shelves and tapping walls for hidden compartments. It was Hastings who found it, tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of The Vicar of Wakefield. The diary was a slim, leather-bound volume, its pages filled with Mrs. McGinty's precise handwriting. Poirot opened it, his fingers delicate as if handling a sacred text. The entries were a catalogue of village secrets: Mr. Langley's gambling debts, Dr. Bentley's overuse of laudanum, Miss Vernon's clandestine meetings with a man whose initials were J.H. One entry, dated the day before the murder, stood out. October 17, 1952. I have confirmed my suspicions about A.V. She meets J.H. in secret, believing no one knows. I saw them by the river near the old mill. She thinks to deceive me, but I will confront her. Tomorrow I shall speak to the vicar. Poirot's eyes narrowed. J.H., a lover perhaps, or an accomplice. This, Hastings, is the secret that cost Madame McGinty her life. The discovery of the diary shifted the investigation's focus. Poirot insisted on visiting the river path where the clay-like mud had been found. The path winding past the old mill was narrow and secluded, hidden by willows. Poirot examined the ground, noting fresh footprints that matched the one near the hall. Someone came this way recently, he said, and not alone. There are two sets of prints, one heavy, one light. As they returned to the hall, Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities. The diary, the wool, the footprints, they are threads, Hastings, but they do not yet form a pattern. The red herrings, they multiply, but Hercule Poirot will not be distracted. Inspector Grayson, however, was undeterred. I'm bringing in Miss Vernon and Dr. Bentley, he declared. The evidence is piling up. Poirot's voice was calm but firm. Do as you must, Inspector, but the truth, it is not in your net. Not yet. Tomorrow we will unravel more of this knot. The diary, it speaks, and we must listen. As the day drew to a close, Poirot stood in the garden gazing at the river path. The red herrings had clouded the investigation, but the little gray cells were working tirelessly, weaving the threads of evidence into a tapestry that would soon reveal the killer's face. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The sixth day of the investigation dawned with a brittle clarity, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Thornfield Hall. St. Agnes Grange, though outwardly calm, buzzed with whispers of the murder. Each villager weaving their own theories about who had plunged the knitting needle into Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's heart. Inside the hall, Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, his eyes fixed on the armchair where the crime had occurred, his mind sifting through the tangle of clues like a master weaver at a loom. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood by the window, his notebook filled with jottings from the previous day's revelations. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice a low murmur. We are at a delicate moment. The diary, it has given us a glimpse of the truth, but it is the smallest detail that will illuminate the path. Today we seek the clue that binds the threads, the letter, the wool, the mud, the diary. One detail, Hastings, will unravel the knot. Hastings, flipping through his notes, frowned. The diary pointed to Miss Vernon and this J.H. fellow. And the red wool. Could it belong to someone else in the village? Perhaps we should check the Women's Institute. They'd know who knits with red. Poirot's mustache twitched with approval. An excellent suggestion, Hastings, but first we return to the scene. The drawing room. It holds secrets yet to be uncovered. The room was as they had left it, save for the absence of Mrs. McGinty's body. The armchair, stained with blood, stood like a silent witness, the half-finished shawl still draped over its arm. Poirot approached it with the precision of a surgeon, his gloved hands hovering over the fabric. He lifted the shawl, examining its intricate pattern of cables and loops, then paused, his eyes narrowing. A single stitch near the edge was out of place, a clumsy knot where the rest were smooth and even. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot said, pointing to the anomaly. "This stitch, it is not Madame McGinty's work. Her skill, it was impeccable. This knot, it is the work of an amateur, or someone in haste." Hastings peered closer, puzzled. "You think the killer tampered with the shawl? But why?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "To leave a message, perhaps, or to cover one. This knot, it is like a signature, non. We must learn whose hand made it." Their examination was interrupted by Inspector Grayson, who entered with a triumphant air. "Mr. Poirot, we've got something new. The blood on Dr. Bentley's gloves, it's Mrs. McGinty's. The lab confirmed it this morning. And we've checked Miss Vernon's alibi. The vicarage clock runs 5 minutes slow, so she could have left by 10 and reached the hall by 10:15. Poirot's expression remained impassive. "The gloves, they are interesting, Inspector, but they are too convenient, non? And the clock, it is a small discrepancy, but not conclusive. Tell me, have you found the Red Wool's source?" Grayson shook his head. "Not yet, but we're searching the village. My money's still on Bentley or Vernon. They've got the strongest motives." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Motives, oui, but motives alone do not a murderer make. We must follow the clues, not the emotions. Come, Hastings, we visit the Women's Institute." The Women's Institute met in the village hall, a modest building adorned with faded bunting and posters for the upcoming harvest festival. Mrs. Marjorie Tate, the chairwoman, greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. A stout woman with a penchant for floral dresses, she was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of village gossip and knitting. "Red wool, you say?" Mrs. Tate frowned, adjusting her spectacles. Mrs. McGinty never used red. She preferred creams and pastels, said bright colors were vulgar, but let me think. Miss Vernon bought a skein of red wool last month for a scarf she was making for the church bazaar. And Mrs. Henshaw, she's been knitting a red blanket for her nephew. Oh, and young Tom Willard's mother, she knits red mittens for him every winter. Poirot's eyes lit up. "Most illuminating, Madam Tate. And these items, the scarf, the blanket, the mittens, where might we find them?" Mrs. Tate hesitated. "Miss Vernon's scarf was sold at the bazaar, I believe. Mrs. Henshaw keeps her knitting at home, and Mrs. Willard, well, she's not been well, so Tom picks up her supplies." Poirot thanked her and led Hastings back to the hall, his mind clearly racing. "The red wool, it narrows our field, Hastings. 3 suspects, 3 possible sources, but it is the stitch that intrigues me. We must examine the knitting of Miss Vernon and Mrs. Henshaw." They began with Mrs. Henshaw, who was summoned to the hall with her knitting basket. She produced a half-finished red blanket, its stitches tight and even, with no sign of the clumsy knot Poirot had found. "I've been working on this for weeks," she said, her voice defensive. "It's for my nephew in Exeter. I never brought it to the hall." Poirot examined the blanket, nodding thoughtfully. "Your work, it is meticulous, madam. But tell me, did you ever see Madame McGinty with red wool, perhaps in passing?" Mrs. Henshaw shook her head. "Never. She didn't like it. said it clashed with her shawls. Next they sought Miss Vernon's scarf, which proved more difficult. The bizarre records showed it had been sold to a Mrs. Langley, the solicitor's wife. A visit to the Langley household revealed a garish red scarf, its stitches loose and uneven, but none matching the knot on Mrs. McGinty's shawl. Mrs. Langley, flustered, admitted to buying it out of pity. "Amelia's not much of a knitter," she said. "It's dreadful, really." Poirot's interest deepened. And yet, Mademoiselle Vernon, she chose red. A bold choice for a woman so reserved. Curious, no? Back at the hall, Poirot returned to the shawl, his fingers tracing the errant knot. "This stitch, Hastings, it is the key. It was made in haste, perhaps in panic. The killer, they touched the shawl, left their mark, and the red wool, it is a bridge to the truth." As the afternoon waned, Poirot requested a map of the hall and its grounds, which the constable provided. He studied it intently, noting the proximity of the river path to the drawing-room window. "The mud, the wool, the stitch, the diary, they are connected, Hastings. The killer, they moved through this house with purpose, but they left traces. We must find the diary's J.H., and we must learn why the stitch was made." Inspector Grayson, overhearing, scoffed. "You're chasing shadows, Mr. Poirot. The gloves and the milkman's sighting are solid evidence. I'm preparing charges against Bentley." Poirot's voice was calm but firm. "Charge if you must, Inspector, but the truth, it will not be so easily captured. The red herrings, they swim in schools, but Hercule Poirot sees through the water." As evening fell, Poirot stood by the drawing-room window, gazing at the river path. The clumsy knot, the red wool, the diary's cryptic initials. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot's little gray cells were knitting them together, stitch by careful stitch, toward the truth that lay hidden in the heart of Thornfield Hall. Chapter 7. More Lies. Surface. The 7th day of the investigation into Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder brought a sharp wind to St. Agnes Grange, rattling the windows of Thornfield Hall and stirring the fallen leaves into restless swirls across the garden. The village, though outwardly resuming its daily rhythms, remained gripped by suspicion, with neighbors eyeing one another warily as whispers of secrets and motives spread like wildfire. Inside the hall, Hercule Poirot stood in the study, his gloved hands carefully turning the pages of Mrs. McGinty's diary. His eyes alight with the intensity of a man piecing together a delicate mosaic. Captain Hastings, seated at the desk, watched with a mixture of anticipation and frustration, his notebook filled with cryptic notes about red wool, clumsy stitches, and elusive initials. "Mon ami," Poirot said, closing the diary with a soft thud, "the truth, it begins to emerge, but it is cloaked in lies. The diary, it speaks of secrets, affairs, debts, betrayals. But which secret drove a hand to murder? We must probe deeper into the hearts of those who weave these falsehoods." Hastings frowned, tapping his pen against the page. The diary mentioned J.H. and Miss Vernon's meetings by the river. Could J.H. be the key? Perhaps he's the one who killed her to protect their secret. Poirot's mustache quivered with a faint smile. "An astute observation, Hastings, but we must not leap to conclusions. The initials, they are a clue, but they are also a distraction. We must uncover the relationships that bind our suspects. Today we dig beneath the surface." Inspector Grayson entered, his face flushed with determination. "Mr. Poirot, we've got new information." A neighbor saw Tom Willard near the river path at 9:30 that night, not at the pub as he claimed. And we've traced the red wool. It matches a skein sold to Mrs. Henshaw's sister who gave it to her last month. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Most interesting, Inspector. The boy, he lies about his whereabouts, and the wool, it circles back to Madame Henshaw. But the clumsy stitch, does it match her work? Grayson shrugged. We're checking her blanket again. But Tom's alibi falling apart puts him in the frame. I'm bringing him in for questioning. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Inspector. Lies, they are like threads. Pull one and others unravel. Let us speak to Monsieur Willard first, and then we shall revisit Madame Henshaw. Tom Willard was summoned, his sullen demeanor now tinged with defiance. He slouched into the parlor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes avoiding Poirot's piercing gaze. I told you I was at the pub, he muttered before Poirot could speak. Monsieur Willard, Poirot said, his voice smooth but unyielding, a witness places you near the river path at 9:30, not at the Red Lion. Why did you lie about your whereabouts? Tom's jaw tightened, his face reddening. I was at the pub, but I stepped out for a bit, needed air. I walked by the river, that's all, didn't go near the hall. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes like twin searchlights. And yet the river path, it leads to Thornfield Hall. Did you see anyone, perhaps? A figure, a meeting, or were you there to meet someone yourself? Tom's hands clenched. I didn't see nothing. I was alone, all right? I went back to the pub after. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. And the red wool, Monsieur Willard? Your mother, she knits with it, no? Did you ever bring her wool to the hall? Perhaps to show Madame McGinty? Tom's eyes widened, then narrowed. I don't knit, Mr. Poirot. Ma does, but I never brought nothing here. Ask her yourself. As Tom was dismissed, Poirot turned to Hastings. The boy, he is hiding something, but it is not murder, not yet. His lie, it protects someone. We must discover who. Next, they called Mrs. Henshaw, whose nervous demeanor had intensified. She clutched her knitting basket as if it were a lifeline, her eyes darting to the door. Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. Madame Henshaw, we have learned that the red wool found in Madame McGinty's basket matches a skein given to you by your sister. Yet you said you never brought your knitting to the hall. Can you explain this? Mrs. Henshaw's face paled. I must have dropped some wool here by mistake. I sometimes carry it in my apron, but I swear I didn't touch her shawl. Poirot's gaze lingered on her trembling hands. And the diary, madame. Did Madame McGinty ever speak to you of her observations about the village? About perhaps a certain J.H.? Mrs. Henshaw's breath caught. She mentioned someone, yes. Said she'd seen Miss Vernon with a man by the river. Didn't say who, but she was upset. Said it wasn't proper. Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a polite smile. The web, it tightens, Hastings. The diary, the wool, the river path. They converge on Miss Vernon and this mysterious J.H. But there is more to uncover. The afternoon brought a deeper dive into the diary's entries. Poirot and Hastings pored over its pages, finding references to financial troubles and hidden relationships. One entry, dated a week before the murder, caught Poirot's attention. October 10th, 1952. C.L. came to me desperate. His debts are mounting and he fears ruin. I refuse to lend more, but he grows reckless. I fear he may do something foolish. C.L., Hastings said, looking up. Charles Langley? Précisément, Poirot replied. His debts, they give him motive, and his lie about being home alone, it is fragile, non. They summoned Mr. Langley, whose bluster had faded into a nervous fidgeting. He admitted to his debts, but denied any wrongdoing. I was home, Mr. Poirot, he insisted. I didn't need to kill her. She'd already refused me. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, Monsieur Langley, you argued with her days before her death. Did she threaten to expose your financial troubles? Langley's face reddened. She said she'd tell the bank, but I didn't kill her, I swear. As Langley left, Poirot murmured, His fear, it is real, but his guilt, it is uncertain. The lies, they multiply, Hastings. The day's inquiries ended with a visit to the river path where Poirot examined the footprints again. He noted a small discarded cigarette stub near the willows, its brand unfamiliar to the village. This, he said, holding it up, is not local. It is another thread, Hastings, leading us to an outsider, or someone pretending to be one. As evening fell, Poirot stood in the study, the diary open before him. The lies of Tom Willard, Mrs. Henshaw, and Charles Langley had surfaced, each revealing a piece of the puzzle. The initials, J.H., the red wool, the clumsy stitch, and now the cigarette stub were weaving a pattern, one that Poirot's little gray cells were beginning to discern. The truth, though still obscured, was drawing closer, hidden in the intricate knots of St. Agnes Grange's secrets. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The 8th day of the investigation into Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder brought a restless energy to St. Agnes's Grange. The village, though outwardly maintaining its decorum, was a cauldron of whispered accusations and sidelong glances. Thornfield Hall, its gray stone walls bathed in the pale light of an overcast sky, seemed to pulse with the weight of its secrets. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat in the parlor, his small, precise figure a beacon of calm amid the storm of suspicion. Captain Hastings, his notebook worn from constant use, stood by the window watching the villagers pass by the gate, their faces etched with curiosity and fear. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant, we approach a turning point. The lies, they have piled high, like the leaves in the garden, but now a crack appears in the facade. Someone will break, Hastings, and in their breaking we will glimpse the truth. Hastings, flipping through his notes, frowned. The diary, the red wool, the cigarette stub, the footprints, it's a tangle, Poirot. And now we've got Tom lying about the river path, Mrs. Henshaw's wool, and Langley's debts. But who's J.H.? That's what's driving me mad. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. Patience, Hastings. The initials, they are a key, but not the only one. Today we apply pressure, not with force, but with the mind. We will gather our suspects, observe their reactions, and one, I predict, will falter. Inspector Grayson entered, his face a mask of frustration. Mr. Poirot, we've hit a wall. The cigarette stub you found, it's a foreign brand, Turkish, not sold locally. No one in the village admits to smoking it. And the lab says the blood on Bentley's gloves is definitely Mrs. McGinty's, but the gloves are too big for him. I'm still betting on him or Miss Vernon. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The Turkish cigarette, it is a curious detail, non. An outsider, perhaps, or a deliberate misdirection. And the gloves, they are a frame, Inspector, but a clumsy one. We must now shake the tree and see what falls. Poirot requested that all suspects, Dr. Bentley, Miss Vernon, Mr. Langley, Mrs. Henshaw, and Tom Willard, be gathered in the drawing room that afternoon. The room, still bearing the faint stain of Mrs. McGinty's blood, was an oppressive setting, its heavy curtains and dark wood amplifying the tension. The suspects arrived one by one, their faces a mix of defiance, fear, and exhaustion. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped, his demeanor calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice cutting through the silence. "We are here to discuss the death of Madame McGinty, a woman who saw too much and said too little. Each of you have secrets, and these secrets, they weave a web around her murder. I ask you now to consider, what did she know that cost her her life?" Dr. Bentley shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming on his medical bag. "I've told you, Mr. Poirot, we argued about her will. That's all." Poirot's gaze turned to Miss Vernon, whose pale face was drawn tight. "And you, mademoiselle, what of the letter she wrote accusing you of a grave secret? A secret involving a certain J.H. Miss Vernon's hands trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what she meant, I swear it." Poirot's eyes moved to Tom Willard, who stood sullenly by the door. "And you, Monsieur Willard, why did you lie about your whereabouts? The river path, it holds answers, does it not?" Tom's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Mrs. Henshaw, clutching her knitting basket, murmured, "I've done nothing wrong, sir. I told you about the wool." Mr. Langley, his face flushed, snapped, "This is absurd. You're hounding us for no reason." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "No reason? Non, mes amis. There is a reason. A knitting needle through the heart of Madame McGinty. And there is a clue, a small one, that points to the truth. A clumsy stitch in her shawl, made by a hand not her own. A strand of red wool not hers. A cigarette stub not local. And a diary filled with your secrets." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on them. It was then that Miss Vernon broke. Her hands flew to her face and a sob escaped her lips. "I can't bear it any more," she cried, her voice cracking. "Eleanor knew about James Hartley. We were in love, but he's married. She saw us by the river, threatened to tell his wife. I begged her not to, but she wouldn't listen." The room froze, every eye on Miss Vernon. Poirot's expression remained calm, but his eyes were alight with interest. "James Hartley, mademoiselle? The J.H. of the diary?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, he's a solicitor in Exeter. I met him at the hall last month when he came to discuss Mrs. McGinty's will. We fell in love. But I didn't kill her, Mr. Poirot. I was at the vicarage, I swear." Poirot's voice was gentle but probing. "And did Monsieur Hartley visit the hall that night? Did he perhaps smoke a Turkish cigarette?" Miss Vernon's eyes widened. "No, he was in Exeter. He doesn't smoke." Poirot nodded, turning to the others. "And you, mes amis? Does anyone wish to add to this confession? The truth, it is close now." Mrs. Henshaw's hands tightened on her basket, her face pale. Tom Willard shifted, his eyes darting to the floor. Dr. Bentley and Mr. Langley exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. Poirot dismissed them, his expression thoughtful. As they filed out, he turned to Hastings. "The crack, it has appeared, mon ami. Mademoiselle Vernon, she has given us a name, James Hartley. We must verify his whereabouts. And the Turkish cigarette, it is a clue that does not fit, yet it must." Hastings frowned. Do you think Hartley's involved? Or is Miss Vernon lying to protect him? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. She protects him, but not from murder, perhaps from scandal. The killer, they are among us, but they hide behind another's secret. We must find Hartley, and we must revisit the river path. The afternoon was spent tracking down James Hartley. A telegram to Exeter confirmed he was a solicitor, married, and had been in his office until late on the night of the murder with colleagues as witnesses. The Turkish cigarette, however, remained a mystery. No one in the village admitted to smoking such a brand, and Hartley's colleagues denied he smoked at all. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings returned to the river path, where the footprints and cigarette stub had been found. Poirot knelt, examining the ground, his gloved fingers brushing the earth. The footprints, they are two, one heavy, one light. A meeting, perhaps, between lovers or conspirators. And the cigarette, it is a deliberate clue left to mislead. Back at the hall, Poirot sat in the study, the diary open before him. Miss Vernon's confession had shifted the investigation, revealing a secret that Mrs. McGinty had died for. But the clumsy stitch, the red wool, and the Turkish cigarette still pointed to a deeper truth, one that Poirot's little gray cells were working tirelessly to uncover. The emotional turning point had come, but the final revelation was yet to be woven. Chapter 9. The Trap. The 9th day of the investigation into Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder dawned with a deceptive calm over St. Agnes's Grange. The village, though still whispering of the crime, had settled into an uneasy rhythm, as if hoping the truth would emerge without further disruption. Thornfield Hall, however, remained a crucible of tension, its heavy stone walls seeming to guard the secrets within. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, stood in the drawing room, his sharp eyes scanning the scene of the crime once more. Captain Hastings, at his side, clutched his notebook, his patience wearing thin as the web of clues grew ever more tangled. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice a quiet cadence. "We are close to the heart of this mystery. The threads, the diary, the red wool, the clumsy stitch, the Turkish cigarette, they are converging. Today we set a trap, not with force but with the mind. The killer, they will betray themselves under pressure." Hastings frowned, glancing at his notes. "A trap, Poirot? You mean to gather the suspects again? Miss Vernon's confession about James Hartley was a breakthrough, but we've ruled him out. And the cigarette stub, nobody admits to smoking it. How do we flush out the killer?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a knowing smile. "By creating a moment of crisis, Hastings. The guilty, they are like a skein of wool. Pull the right thread and they unravel. We will gather our suspects, present the evidence, and watch their reactions. One will falter and the truth will emerge." Inspector Grayson entered, his face set in a scowl. "Mr. Poirot, I've had enough of your theatrics. We've got blood on Bentley's gloves, a witness placing Miss Vernon near the hall, and now Tom Willard's alibi crumbling. I'm ready to charge someone today." Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene but firm. "Charge if you must, Inspector, but you will catch only shadows. The truth, it requires finesse. This afternoon we will assemble the suspects in this very room. I have a plan, and Hercule Poirot does not fail." The preparations were swift but meticulous. Poirot instructed the constable to summon Dr. Bentley, Miss Vernon, Mr. Langley, Mrs. Henshaw, and Tom Willard to the drawing room at 3 o'clock. He also requested the presence of Mrs. Marjorie Tate from the Women's Institute, whose knowledge of the village's knitting habits had proven useful. The room was arranged with chairs in a semicircle facing the blood-stained armchair, a stark reminder of the crime. Poirot stood before it, his small figure commanding despite his unassuming stature. As the suspects filed in, the air grew heavy with anticipation. Dr. Bentley clutched his medical bag, his face pale. Miss Vernon sat rigidly, her eyes red from crying. Mr. Langley fidgeted, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. English, not Turkish. Mrs. Henshaw gripped her knitting basket, her lips pursed. Tom Willard slouched by the door, his sullen gaze fixed on the floor. Mrs. Tate, an outsider to the immediate circle, looked uneasy but curious. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we are gathered to unravel the mystery of Madame McGinty's death. Each of you have a connection to her, a secret, a motive, a lie. Let us review the evidence." He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. First, the letter, addressed to Mademoiselle Vernon, accusing her of a grave secret. She has confessed to an affair with Monsieur James Hartley, a married man. Madame McGinty knew this and threatened to expose it. But Monsieur Hartley was in Exeter, with witnesses, on the night of the murder. Miss Vernon's head bowed, her hands clenching her handkerchief. Poirot continued, "Then, the red wool found in Madame McGinty's basket. It matches a skein owned by Madame Henshaw, yet she denies bringing it to the hall. And the clumsy stitch in the shawl, a mark not made by Madame McGinty's skilled hand." Mrs. Henshaw's fingers tightened on her basket, her face paling. Poirot's gaze moved to Dr. Bentley. "The gloves found in your surgery stained with Madame McGinty's blood. Yet they are too large for your hands, doctor. A frame, perhaps." Dr. Bentley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot turned to Tom Willard. "And you, Monsieur Willard, lied about your whereabouts. You were seen near the river path where footprints and a Turkish cigarette were found. A cigarette no one claims." Tom's eyes darted to the floor, his hands balling into fists. Finally, Poirot addressed Mr. Langley. "And you, monsieur, argued with Madame McGinty over debts. She threatened to ruin you. A powerful motive, no?" Langley's cigarette trembled in his hand. "I didn't do it, Poirot. I swear." Poirot paused, letting the silence stretch, his eyes scanning each face. Then he produced the diary from his pocket, holding it aloft. "This diary, it contains Madame McGinty's observations, secrets about each of you. But one entry stands out, a meeting by the river between Mademoiselle Vernon and J.H. Yet there is more. A final note, written the day of her death. I have seen the truth about C.L. His desperation grows. I fear what he may do." Langley's face drained of color, his cigarette dropping to the floor. "That's nonsense. She was mistaken." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Mistaken, monsieur? Or did she see too much? Let us consider a hypothesis. Suppose the killer entered this room expecting a confrontation. Madame McGinty, she sat here knitting. The needle, it was at hand, a weapon of opportunity. The killer struck then, in panic, touched the shawl, leaving a clumsy stitch and a strand of red wool. They fled, perhaps by the river path, dropping a cigarette to mislead. But the diary, it tells the truth. The room was silent, the suspects frozen. Then Mrs. Henshaw's basket slipped from her lap, spilling skeins of wool, red among them. she gasped, scrambling to gather them, her hands shaking. "It's not what you think," she cried. "I dropped that wool weeks ago." Poirot's eyes locked onto her. "Weeks ago, madame. Yet the wool, it is fresh, untangled. And the stitch. Did you in a moment of fear touch the shawl?" Mrs. Henshaw's face crumpled, tears welling. "I didn't kill her. I found her before I screamed. I saw the needle, the blood. I touched the shawl, trying to cover her. I didn't know what to do." The room erupted in murmurs, but Poirot raised a hand. "Merci, Madame Henshaw. Your truth, it is a step forward, but the killer. They are still among us." As the suspects were dismissed, their faces a mix of relief and dread, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The trap, it has sprung, mon ami. Madame Henshaw, she has revealed her actions, but not her guilt. The killer, they feel the net tightening. Tomorrow we will pull the final thread." Inspector Grayson, shaken by the confrontation, muttered, "You're playing a dangerous game, Poirot." "But I'll admit that was something." Poirot's smile was serene. "The game, it is not yet won, Inspector, but the board, it is set." As evening fell, Poirot stood by the drawing-room window, gazing at the darkening garden. The trap had revealed a partial truth, but the killer's identity remained just out of reach, hidden in the intricate pattern of St. Agnes Grange's secrets. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The 10th day of the investigation into Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder dawned with a heavy stillness over St. Agnes Grange, as if the village itself held its breath, awaiting the resolution of the dark drama unfolding within Thornfield Hall. The grand old manor, its stone walls steeped in secrets, stood as a silent witness to the gathering storm. Inside the drawing-room, Hercule Poirot had orchestrated a final assembly, his meticulous preparations complete. The blood-stained armchair remained the grim centerpiece, surrounded by chairs for the suspects: Dr. Harold Bentley, Miss Amelia Vernon, Mr. Charles Langley, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, and Tom Willard. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his notebook clutched tightly, his heart pounding with anticipation. Inspector Grayson, though skeptical of Poirot's theatrics, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, ready to see the case concluded. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant in the hushed room, "we have reached the moment of truth. The death of Madame Eleanor McGinty, it was no random act, but a crime of precision and passion woven with the threads of deceit. Today, Hercule Poirot will unravel this tapestry and reveal the killer." The suspects sat rigid, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and exhaustion. Poirot paced slowly, his small figure commanding the room, his eyes sharp as they darted from one face to another. "Let us begin with the facts," he said, holding up Mrs. McGinty's diary. Madame McGinty, she was a woman who saw everything: secrets, lies, betrayals. Her diary, it is a map of motives: Mademoiselle Vernon's affair with James Hartley, Monsieur Langley's debts, Dr. Bentley's questionable practices, Madame Henshaw's quiet resentment, and Monsieur Willard's hidden loyalties. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The crime occurred between 10 and midnight. A knitting needle, her own, pierced her heart. No struggle, no defense. She trusted her killer. The clues: a clumsy stitch in her shawl, a strand of red wool, a Turkish cigarette by the river path, footprints in the clay, and a diary that speaks of J.H. and C.L. These, they are the threads we have followed. Poirot turned to Miss Vernon, whose hands trembled in her lap. "Mademoiselle, Your affair with James Hartley was discovered by Madame McGinty. She wrote of it, threatened to expose you. You were seen near the hall at 10:15 despite your claim of being at the vicarage. Miss Vernon's voice was a whisper. It wasn't me, Mr. Poirot. I was home by 10. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Dr. Bentley. Doctor, your gloves stained with her blood were found in your surgery, yet they do not fit you. And your argument with Madame McGinty, it was heated, non? She accused you of negligence. Dr. Bentley's face paled. I didn't kill her. I left her alive at 10:30. Poirot's eyes moved to Mr. Langley. Monsieur Langley, your debts, they were a source of shame. Madame McGinty threatened to expose you, to ruin you. You claim to have been home, but no one confirms this. Langley's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. I didn't do it, Poirot. I swear. Poirot turned to Mrs. Henshaw, whose knitting basket sat at her feet. Madame Henshaw, the red wool, it matches your skein. You admitted to touching the shawl in panic after finding her dead. But was it truly after? Mrs. Henshaw's eyes filled with tears. I didn't kill her. I only touched it to cover her. Finally, Poirot faced Tom Willard, whose sullen expression had hardened. Monsieur Willard, you lied about your whereabouts. You were on the river path where we found footprints in a Turkish cigarette. You protect someone, non? Tom's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Poirot stepped to the center of the room, his voice rising. The killer, they are clever, but they made mistakes. The red wool, it was not Madame McGinty's. The clumsy stitch, it was not her work. The cigarette, it is foreign, yet no one claims it. The diary, it points to secrets, but the truth lies in the smallest detail. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Madame McGinty sat here, knitting. The killer entered, known to her, trusted. They spoke, perhaps argued. In a moment of rage or fear, the killer seized the knitting needle and struck. Then, in haste, they touched the shawl, leaving a clumsy stitch and a strand of red wool. They fled, perhaps by the river path, dropping the cigarette to mislead. Poirot's gaze settled on Tom Willard. Monsieur Willard, it was you on the river path, was it not? But you were not alone. You were with another, someone you protect. The cigarette, it was yours, smuggled from your time in the army, none? You smoked it to calm your nerves after witnessing something terrible. Tom's face drained of color, his hands balling into fists. I didn't kill her. Poirot's voice softened. No, you did not, but you know who did. You saw them on the river path after the deed was done. Tell us, who was it? The room was silent, every eye on Tom. His shoulders slumped and his voice broke. It was Mrs. Henshaw. I saw her by the river just after 10. She was running, looking scared. I didn't know what she'd done till later. Mrs. Henshaw gasped, her basket tumbling to the floor. No, that's a lie. I found her dead, I told you. Poirot's eyes locked onto her. Madame Henshaw, you lied about the wool, about touching the shawl. You were not merely a witness. You were in the room before you screamed. The clumsy stitch, it matches your work, tight but uneven under pressure. You resented Madame McGinty, her judgments, her stinginess. She knew your secret, perhaps a theft, a betrayal, and threatened to expose you. In a moment of panic, you struck. Mrs. Henshaw's face crumpled, sobs racking her body. I didn't mean to. She was going to tell everyone about the money I took from her desk years ago. I begged her to stay quiet, but she wouldn't. I grabbed the needle. It was an accident. The room erupted in gasps, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. An accident, perhaps, but a murder nonetheless. You fled to the river path where Tom saw you. The cigarette, it was his, but you hoped it would mislead us. The gloves you placed in Dr. Bentley's surgery to cast suspicion. Mrs. Henshaw collapsed weeping as Grayson moved to restrain her. Poirot turned to the others. The truth, it is clear now. The secrets, they drove her to desperation, but it was her own hand that struck. As the suspects dispersed, shaken and somber, Poirot stood by the armchair, his expression grave. The human heart, Hastings, it is a complex thing. Madame Henshaw, she was not evil, but fear, it can make monsters of us all. The case was closed, the killer revealed, but the weight of the truth lingered in the air of Thornfield Hall, a testament to the power of Poirot's little gray cells. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after Mrs. Clara Henshaw's confession broke over St. Agnes Grange like a wave, washing away the fog of suspicion that had clouded the village for 10 days. Thornfield Hall, though still grand in its Jacobean splendor, seemed less oppressive, as if the revelation of the truth had lifted a weight from its ancient stones. The villagers gathered in small knots outside the church, and the pub spoke in hushed tones, their relief tempered by the shock of learning that the unassuming housekeeper had been driven to murder. Inside the hall, Hercule Poirot sat in the parlor, his small frame composed in a high-backed chair, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the morning light. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his notebook closed, his mind still reeling from the dramatic scene of the previous day. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant. "The case. It is closed, but the work of Hercule Poirot is not yet complete. The truth, it must be reflected upon, for it is in understanding the human heart that we learn to prevent such tragedies." Hastings, leaning against the mantel, sighed. "It's hard to believe, Poirot. Mrs. Henshaw seemed so ordinary. A thief, yes, but a murderer? And all because Mrs. McGinty threatened to expose her." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint melancholic smile. "Ordinary, Hastings? No, no one is truly ordinary. Beneath the surface, every heart harbors its secrets, its fears, its breaking points. Madame Henshaw, she was a woman of duty, but also of desperation. The theft, it was a small act, long buried, but Madame McGinty's knowledge of it was a spark that ignited a fatal flame." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. "But the red herrings, Miss Vernon's affair, Dr. Bentley's gloves, Tom's cigarette, they nearly led us astray. How did you know it was Mrs. Henshaw?" Poirot leaned back, his hands clasped over his waistcoat. "The clues, Hastings, they were like the stitches in Madame McGinty's shawl. Each one deliberate, but one out of place. The clumsy stitch, it was the first sign. Madame McGinty's work was impeccable, yet this knot was crude, made in haste. The red wool, it matched Madame Henshaw's skein. And her lie about never bringing it to the hall was fragile. The cigarette, it was Tom's, but placed to mislead. The gloves, too large for Dr. Bentley, were a clumsy frame. And the diary, it spoke of many secrets, but none so personal to Madame Henshaw as her theft." He paused, his eyes distant. The human mind, it seeks to protect itself. Madame Henshaw, she did not plan to kill. She acted in a moment of panic when Madame McGinty's threat to expose her became unbearable. She struck with the needle, then tried to cover her tracks, the stitch, the wool, the flight to the river path. But the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot. Hastings shook his head, marveling. Your little gray cells, Poirot, they never fail. But what about the others? Miss Vernon, Dr. Bentley, Langley? They all had motives. Oui, Poirot agreed. And that was the killer's shield. The village. It is a tapestry of secrets. Mademoiselle Vernon's affair with James Hartley. It was a scandal, but not a crime. Dr. Bentley's negligence. Monsieur Langley's debts. These were motives, but not the motive. Madame Henshaw, she used the other's secrets to obscure her own. The diary, it was her undoing, for it recorded her fear, her guilt. Inspector Grayson entered, his usual scowl softened by a grudging respect. Mr. Poirot, Mrs. Henshaw's confessed fully. She's admitted to stealing money from Mrs. McGinty's desk years ago, small amounts to help her sister. Mrs. McGinty found out last month, threatened to report her unless she repaid it all. Henshaw panicked, begged her to stay silent, and when she refused, well, you know the rest. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. A tragedy, Inspector, born of small sins and great fears. Madame Henshaw, she is not a monster, but a woman who lost her way. Grayson hesitated, then added, We found the money in her cottage, hidden in a tin. She'd been saving to repay it, but it was too late. She's being taken to Exeter for trial. Poirot's eyes softened. Justice, it must be served, but I pity her, Inspector. The human heart, it is fragile, none. As Grayson left to oversee the formalities, Poirot rose, adjusting his tie with meticulous care. Come, Hastings, let us walk the grounds one last time. The air, it clears the mind. They stepped into the garden where the roses, though fading, still clung to their beauty. Poirot paused by the river path, where the footprints and cigarette stub had been found. This case, Hastings, it reminds us that truth is not always in the grand gesture, but in the small details. The stitch, the wool, the lie. We must always look closer. Hastings nodded, his voice thoughtful. You always say it's the psychology that matters, Poirot. Mrs. Henshaw, she was driven by fear, not hatred. Précisément, Poirot replied. The psychology, it is the key. Madame McGinty, she saw too much, judged too harshly. Her death, it was a warning to us all, to tread lightly with the secrets of others. They walked in silence for a moment, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. Poirot's gaze lingered on the river, its surface calm but hiding currents beneath. The world, it is full of such currents, Hastings. We who seek justice must navigate them with care. As they returned to the hall, Poirot's mood lightened slightly. This case, it has been a challenge, but a satisfying one. The little gray cells, they have triumphed again. Hastings smiled. And now, Poirot, back to London? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Oui, mon ami, but first a cup of tisane at the inn. Hercule Poirot, he does not solve mysteries on an empty stomach. As they left Thornfield Hall, the village of St. Agnes Grange seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare, its peace tentatively restored. Poirot, with his unmatched intellect and unerring sense of human nature, had unraveled the knot of Mrs. McGinty's murder, leaving behind a lesson in the power of observation and the fragility of the human heart. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The 12th day since Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder found St. Agnes Grange bathed in a soft autumn light, the village's quiet lanes and ivy-clad cottages resuming their familiar rhythm, though the shadow of the crime lingered. Thornfield Hall, Its grandeur undimmed stood as a silent monument to the secrets it had harbored, and the truth now laid bare. Inside the parlor, Hercule Poirot sat with a cup of tisane, his small, precise figure a study in calm reflection. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, flipped through his notebook, the pages filled with the twists and turns of the investigation that had culminated in Mrs. Clara Henshaw's confession. "Mon ami," Poirot said, setting his cup down with a delicate clink, "the case is closed, yet its echoes remain. The truth, it has been revealed, but it leaves behind questions, not of guilt, but of the human condition. Why does a woman like Madame Henshaw, so ordinary, so dutiful, turn to murder? It is a puzzle as complex as the crime itself." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I still can't quite believe it, Poirot. Mrs. Henshaw seemed so unremarkable. To think she stole from Mrs. McGinty for years and then killed her to keep it quiet. It's chilling." Poirot's mustache quivered with a faint, thoughtful smile. "Chilling, oui, but also human. Madame Henshaw, she was not driven by malice but by fear. Fear of shame, of ruin, of losing the life she had built. Madame McGinty, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, became the mirror of that fear. The knitting needle, it was not a weapon of choice but of desperation." Hastings shook his head. "And the others, Miss Vernon, Dr. Bentley, Langley, Tom, they all had secrets too. Mrs. McGinty's diary was like a bomb waiting to go off." "Précisément," Poirot agreed, his eyes gleaming. "Her diary, it was her power, but also her downfall. She saw the village as a tapestry of sins, and she believed it her duty to unravel it. But in doing so, she pulled a thread that led to her own destruction." The door opened and Inspector Grayson entered, his usual brusqueness softened by a grudging admiration. "Mr. Poirot, I've just come from the station. Mrs. Henshaw's been processed. She's calm now, resigned. She's told us everything. The thefts, small sums over years to help her sister's family, and how Mrs. McGinty found out last month. She says she didn't mean to kill her, just to stop her from talking." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "A tragedy, Inspector, born of small acts and great consequences. Madame Henshaw, she is not a villain, but a victim of her own choices. And what of the others? How do they fare?" Grayson shrugged. "Miss Vernon's keeping to herself, probably ashamed of her affair coming out. Dr. Bentley's back at his surgery, though folks are wary of him now. Langley's drowning his debts in whiskey as usual. And Tom. Willard, he's sticking close to his mother, looking guilty but relieved." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the diary? It has been returned to the family?" Grayson nodded. "It's with Mrs. McGinty's solicitor in Exeter. They're deciding what to do with it. Burn it, most likely. Too many secrets for anyone's good." Poirot's lips pursed. A wise decision, perhaps. Secrets. They are like embers, best extinguished before they ignite another fire. As Grayson left to finalize his reports, Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care. "Come, Hastings, let us take a final turn through the village. The air, it will help us reflect." They stepped out into the crisp afternoon, the lanes of St. Agnes Grange bustling with villagers going about their daily tasks. The church bell tolled softly, a reminder of the upcoming Sunday service, where the vicar would no doubt preach on forgiveness and redemption. Poirot and Hastings walked toward the river path where the footprints and Turkish cigarette had once pointed to a hidden truth. "The cigarette," Hastings said, breaking the silence. "It was Tom's, but it threw us off. Why did he leave it there? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Monsieur Willard, he is young, impulsive. He smoked to calm his nerves after seeing Madame Henshaw fleeing the hall. He did not intend to mislead, but his fear it created a false trail. The human heart, Hastings, it is not always deliberate in its deceptions. They paused by the river, its waters glinting in the sunlight. Poirot's gaze lingered on the willows, their branches swaying gently. This case, it has taught us much, mon ami. The power of observation, the importance of the smallest detail, the stitch, the wool, the diary's words. But more than that, it has shown us the fragility of trust. Madame McGinty trusted Madame Henshaw, and that trust was her undoing. Hastings nodded, his voice thoughtful. You always say it's the psychology that matters, Poirot. Mrs. Henshaw's fear, Mrs. McGinty's judgment. They collided in that moment. Oui, Poirot said softly. The psychology, it is the thread that binds all crimes. We must understand not only what was done, but why. Only then can we hope to prevent such tragedies. As they turned back toward the village, Poirot's mood lightened slightly. This case, it has been a challenge, Hastings, but a satisfying one. The little gray cells, they have not failed us. Hastings grinned. They never do, Poirot. But what now? Back to London for a rest? Poirot's eyes twinkled. A rest? Non, mon ami. The world, it is full of mysteries, and Hercule Poirot, he is never truly at rest. But first, a proper meal at the inn. The cuisine of St. Agnes Grange, it leaves much to be desired. As they walked back to the inn, the village seemed to settle into a tentative peace, its secrets exposed, its wounds beginning to heal. Poirot, with his unmatched intellect and keen insight into human nature, had brought light to the darkness of Thornfield Hall, leaving behind a lesson in the power of truth and the cost of hidden sins. Chapter 13. The Ripple of Consequences. The 13th day since Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder found St. Agnes Grange in a state of fragile recovery. The village's quiet lanes and quaint cottages resuming their daily hum, though the echoes of the crime still lingered in hushed conversations. Thornfield Hall, its imposing facade softened by the golden light of late afternoon, stood as a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded within its walls. Inside the parlor, Hercule Poirot sat with his customary tisane, his small, immaculate figure radiating a quiet satisfaction, though his eyes held a trace of melancholy. Captain Hastings, seated across from him, leafed through his notebook, its pages a testament to the intricate puzzle they had unraveled. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice a soft cadence. The case is closed, the killer revealed, yet the ripples of Madame McGinty's death spread outward, touching every life in this village. It is not enough to find the truth. We must also understand its consequences. Hastings looked up, his expression thoughtful. It's strange, Poirot. The village seems peaceful again, but it's not the same. Mrs. Henshaw's confession has changed how people see each other. There's a wariness now. Poirot's mustache quivered with a faint nod. Oui, Hastings. Truth, it is a double-edged sword. It brings justice, but it also wounds. Madame Henshaw's act born of fear has left a scar on St. Agnes's Grange. The villagers, they will forgive, perhaps, but they will not forget. The door creaked open and Inspector Grayson entered, his usual brusqueness tempered by a newfound respect for Poirot's methods. Mr. Poirot, I've just come from the station. Mrs. Henshaw's been transferred to Exeter for her trial. She's calm, almost relieved, like a weight's been lifted. She's asked to see the vicar, wants to make amends, she says. Poirot's eyes softened. Amends, Inspector. A noble sentiment, but the past, it cannot be undone. Madame Henshaw. She acted in a moment of desperation, but the consequences, they are hers to bear. And what of the others? How do they fare in the wake of this truth? Grayson sighed, settling into a chair. Miss Vernon's keeping to her cottage, avoiding the village. Word of her affair with Hartley's spread, and she's shamed. Dr. Bentley's surgery is quieter than ever. Folks don't trust him after the talk of laudanum. Langley's drinking more, if that's possible, and muttering about leaving the village. Tom Willard's sticking close to his mother, but he's jumpy like he's waiting for the next blow. Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. The secrets, they were the kindling. And Madame McGinty's death, it was the spark. Each of them, they carry their own burden now, guilt, shame, fear. It is the way of human nature, non? Hastings closed his notebook, his voice low. It makes you wonder, Poirot. Mrs. McGinty's diary, it caused so much pain. If she'd kept those secrets to herself, would she still be alive? Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the blood-stained armchair across the room. Perhaps, Hastings, but Madame McGinty, she saw herself as a guardian of morality. Her diary, it was her weapon, her way of controlling the village. She believed it her duty to expose sin, but in doing so, she invited her own destruction. The lesson, it is clear, to judge others is to court danger. Grayson shifted uncomfortably. That diary's been destroyed, by the way. The solicitor burned it, per Mrs. McGinty's family's wishes, said it was for the best. No more secrets to stir up trouble. Poirot's lips pursed, a flicker of disapproval crossing his face. A pity, Inspector. The diary, it was a record of truth, however painful, but perhaps the village is better without it. Some truths, they are best buried. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Marjorie Tate, the chairwoman of the Women's Institute, entered, her floral dress a stark contrast to the somber mood. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you. The village, we're shaken, but we're grateful. You've brought clarity, even if it hurts." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Madame Tate, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to seek the truth, no matter the cost. But I am glad to have brought some measure of peace to St. Agnes's Grange." Mrs. Tate hesitated, then added, "There's talk of a memorial for Mrs. McGinty, a plaque in the church, perhaps. She wasn't always kind, but she was part of us." Poirot's smile was gentle. "A fitting gesture, madam. Let her memory be one of lessons learned, not of bitterness." As Mrs. Tate left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, let us walk the grounds one final time. The air, it will refresh us before we depart." They stepped into the garden, where the roses, now wilting in the late autumn chill, seemed to mourn the loss of innocence. The river path where Tom Willard had been seen and the Turkish cigarette found stretched quietly before them. Poirot paused, his eyes tracing the faint outlines of the footprints in the clay. "This case, Hastings," he said, his voice low, "it has shown us the fragility of trust, the weight of secrets. Madame Henshaw, she was not a villain, but a woman driven to the edge. The others, Miss Vernon, Dr. Bentley, Langley, Tom, they too were shaped by their fears. We must remember this always." Hastings nodded, his gaze on the river. "You saw it all, Poirot. The stitch, the wool, the diary's hints. Your little gray cells, they're something else." Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained solemn. "The little gray cells, they observe, they connect, they understand. But it is the heart, Hastings, that guides them. Without compassion, justice is but a cold blade." As they turned back toward the village, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. Thornfield Hall loomed behind them, its secrets exposed, its wounds beginning to heal. Poirot, with his unmatched intellect and deep insight into human nature, had brought resolution to St. Agnes Grange, leaving behind a legacy of truth and a reminder of the delicate balance between judgment and mercy. Chapter 14. The Ties That Bind. The 14th day since Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder draped St. Agnes Grange in a quiet melancholy, the village caught between the relief of resolution and the lingering ache of betrayal. The autumn leaves, now falling in earnest, carpeted the lanes, their rustling a soft counterpoint to the subdued conversations of the villagers. Thornfield Hall, its stone walls softened by the morning mist, stood as a monument to the drama that had unfolded, its secrets laid bare by Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit of truth. Inside the parlor, Poirot sat with his customary precision, a cup of tisane balanced delicately in his hands, his eyes reflecting a thoughtful calm. Captain Hastings, seated across from him, stared out the window, his notebook tucked away, his mind grappling with the aftermath of Mrs. Clara Henshaw's confession. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice a gentle murmur. "The case is solved, the killer revealed, yet the ties that bind this village remain tangled. The truth, it has freed St. Agnes Grange, but it has also left scars. We must consider the bonds that remain, those of guilt, of forgiveness, of community." Hastings turned, his expression pensive. "It's hard to imagine things going back to normal, Poirot. Mrs. Henshaw's confession shocked everyone. The villagers trusted her, and now, well, they're questioning everyone. Even Miss Vernon's keeping her distance, and she's done nothing wrong." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint, knowing smile. "Normal, Hastings? No. The village will not return to what it was. Truth, it changes the weave of a community just as a single stitch alters a shawl. But these ties they can mend with time and understanding. The villagers, they must learn to forgive, not only Madame Henshaw but themselves." The door opened, and Mrs. Marjorie Tate entered, her floral dress a splash of color in the somber room. She carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, her face a mix of gratitude and unease. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice soft, "I've brought something for you. The Women's Institute wanted to show our thanks. You've given us closure, even if it's painful." She handed Poirot the parcel, which he opened with care. Inside was a finely knit cream shawl, its pattern intricate and flawless, a tribute to Mrs. McGinty's skill. "We finished one of her patterns," Mrs. Tate explained. "It seemed right to honor her memory." Poirot's eyes softened as he traced the delicate stitches. "A beautiful gesture, Madame Tate. Madame McGinty, she would approve. Her legacy, it lives in the skill of your hands, not in the secrets of her diary." Mrs. Tate hesitated, then added, "There's to be a service tomorrow in the church. A memorial for Mrs. McGinty. The vicars asked Miss Vernon to speak to help heal the village. She's nervous, but she's agreed." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. Mademoiselle Vernon, she carries a heavy burden, but her courage, it will help mend these ties. And what of the others? Dr. Bentley, Monsieur Langley, young Tom. Mrs. Tate sighed. Doctor. Bentley's talking of leaving, says the village doesn't trust him anymore. Mr. Langley's quieter, spending more time at home. Tom's helping his mother, but he's still shaken. Feels guilty for not speaking up sooner. Poirot set the shawl aside, his hands clasped. Guilt, it is a heavy thread, but it can be woven into something stronger. The village, it will heal, but it must first face its wounds. After Mrs. Tate left, Poirot rose, gesturing to Hastings. Come, mon ami, let us visit the churchyard. There we may reflect on the ties that bind this village and those that have been broken. They walked through the village, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. The churchyard, bordered by ancient yews, was peaceful, its gravestones worn but dignified. Poirot paused by a freshly prepared plot marked for Mrs. McGinty's burial. Here, she will rest, he said, his voice low. Her life, it was one of observation, of judgment, but in death she teaches us compassion. Hastings nodded, his gaze on the plot. It's strange, Poirot. Mrs. McGinty's diary caused so much pain, but it also brought the truth. Without it, we might never have found Mrs. Henshaw. We, Poirot agreed, his eyes distant. The diary, it was her strength and her weakness. She saw the flaws in others, but not in herself. Her death, it reminds us that to judge is human, but to understand is divine. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind stirring the leaves around them. Poirot's thoughts seemed to drift, his mind sifting through the lessons of the case. This mystery, Hastings, it was not only about murder, but about the ties that bind us, love, fear, loyalty, betrayal. Madame Henshaw, she acted out of fear, but it was her loyalty to her sister that drove her to steal. Mademoiselle Vernon, her love for James Hartley led her to secrecy. Dr. Bentley, Monsieur Langley, young Tom, each bound by their own ties, their own struggles. Hastings smiled faintly. You see it all, Poirot. The little gray cells, they don't just solve crimes, they understand people. Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained solemn. The little gray cells, they observe the heart as well as the mind. It is this understanding that allows Hercule Poirot to bring light to the darkness. As they left the churchyard, the village seemed to stir with a tentative hope. The memorial service, the shawl, the quiet acts of kindness, they were the first stitches in mending the fabric of St. Agnes Grange. Poirot, with his unmatched intellect and deep empathy, had not only solved a murder but had illuminated the delicate bonds that held the village together, leaving behind a legacy of truth and healing. Chapter 15. The Final Stitch. The 15th day since Mrs. Eleanor McGinty's murder brought a gentle calm to St. Agnes Grange, as if the village had exhaled its last breath of turmoil. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the cottages and lanes, softening the edges of a community still tender from the revelation of Mrs. Clara Henshaw's guilt. Thornfield Hall, its stone facade bathed in light, stood less as a monument to tragedy and more as a symbol of resilience, its secrets now woven into the village's history. Inside the parlor, Hercule Poirot prepared to depart, his small, immaculate figure a picture of quiet triumph. His suitcase, packed with meticulous care, rested by the door, and a final cup of tisane steamed in his hand. Captain Hastings stood by the window gazing at the garden where the roses clung stubbornly to their last blooms, his notebook tucked away, its pages a chronicle of a case masterfully solved. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice a soft melody. "The tapestry of this mystery is complete. The threads, the red wool, the clumsy stitch, the diary, the cigarette, they have been woven into a truth that brings justice, if not peace. Now Hercule Poirot takes his leave, but not without a final reflection." Hastings turned, a faint smile on his lips. "It's been quite a case, Poirot. Mrs. Henshaw's confession, the diary's secrets, the way you saw through the red herrings, it's remarkable. But I can't help feeling for the village. They've lost something, haven't they?" Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes thoughtful. "Oui, Hastings, they have lost innocence, but they have gained understanding. St. Agnes Grange, it is like a shawl, torn by tragedy but mended by truth. The villagers, they will carry the memory of Madame McGinty and Madame Henshaw, but they will also learn to forgive, to rebuild." The door opened and Inspector Grayson entered, his usual brusqueness replaced by a quiet respect. "Mr. Poirot, I have just come from the church. The memorial service for Mrs. McGinty was this morning." Miss Vernon spoke, bravely I might add. She talked about forgiveness, about moving forward. The village listened. It felt right. Poirot nodded, setting his cup down with a delicate clink. "Mademoiselle Vernon, she has shown courage. Her words, they are the first stitches in mending this community. And what of Madame Henshaw? How does she fare?" Grayson sighed, settling into a chair. "She's in Exeter, awaiting trial. She's calm, almost at peace. She wrote a letter to the village, apologizing, asking for their forgiveness. The vicar read it at the service. Some folks were moved, others... Well, it'll take time." Poirot's expression was grave. "Time, Inspector, it is the great healer. Madame Henshaw, she acted in fear, but her confession, it shows remorse. The village, it must decide how to weave her back into its fabric, or if it can." Hastings glanced at Poirot, his voice low. "What about the others? Dr. Bentley, Langley, Tom. They're all carrying their own burdens." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Dr. Bentley. He must regain trust, a slow but possible task. Monsieur Langley, his debts will haunt him, but he may yet find redemption. Young Tom, he carries guilt for his silence, but his loyalty to his mother, it is his strength. They are bound by this tragedy, but they are also freed by its resolution." Grayson rose, extending a hand. "I'll admit, Mr. Poirot, I doubted you at first. But you saw what we couldn't. The stitch, the wool, the truth in the diary. You've done St. Agnes Grange a service." Poirot shook his hand, his smile modest. "It is the work of Hercule Poirot to bring order to chaos, Inspector. The little gray cells, they do not rest until the truth is clear." As Grayson left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, let us take one final walk through the village. The air, it will mark the end of this chapter." They stepped out into the crisp afternoon, the lanes of St. Agnes Grange alive with the quiet bustle of daily life. The church bell tolled softly, a reminder of the memorial service that had brought the village together. Poirot and Hastings walked toward the river path where the footprints and Turkish cigarette had once pointed to a hidden truth. The willows swayed gently, their branches whispering in the breeze. "This case," Poirot said, pausing by the river, "it has been a study in the human heart. Madame McGinty, she sought to control through knowledge. But knowledge, it is a dangerous thread. Madame Henshaw, she sought to protect her family, but fear led her to ruin. The others, Miss Vernon, Dr. Bentley, Langley, Tom, they were caught in the same weave, their secrets binding them to this tragedy. Hastings nodded, his gaze on the water. You saw it all, Poirot. The psychology, the details, that clumsy stitch, it was so small, but it told you everything. Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his voice was solemn. The smallest detail, Hastings, it is often the loudest. The stitch, the wool, the diary's words, they were the voices of the truth waiting for Hercule Poirot to listen. But it is the understanding of why, the fear, the shame, the love that completes the picture. As they turned back toward the inn where Poirot's Daimler awaited, the village seemed to glow with a tentative hope. The memorial service, the shawl from the Women's Institute, the quiet acts of reconciliation. They were the final stitches in a tapestry torn by murder but mended by truth. Poirot, with his unmatched intellect and profound empathy, had not only solved a crime but had illuminated the delicate threads of human connection, leaving St. Agnes Grange stronger for it. Back to London, then? Hastings asked, a grin breaking through. Oui, mon ami, Poirot replied, adjusting his hat with a flourish. But first, a proper meal. The cuisine of the inn, it has improved, I hope. Hercule Poirot, he does not depart on an empty stomach. With a final glance at Thornfield Hall, Poirot and Hastings walked toward the inn, the village settling into a new rhythm behind them. The case of Mrs. McGinty's murder was closed, its lessons woven into the fabric of St. Agnes Grange, a testament to the power of truth and the enduring brilliance of Poirot's little gray cells.